Hello, this presentation details how to use Foss's schema to evaluate visual rhetoric. When one sees an image, it is natural for that person to try to evaluate it critically. We automatically try to decipher the who, what, when, where, and how that the image presents. We see these images every day and must evaluate them in split seconds. Most images are constructed to convey an idea. Some ideas are more sophisticated than others and take longer to decipher. Usually, the individual who creates the image tries to appeal to what they perceive as the viewer's common knowledge while being consistent with other user expectations. For example, these road signs would be less effective if they took different shapes that were not consistent with what a driver would be looking for while on the road. In contrast, Perrier's t-shirt campaign used two very familiar images to sell its product. As you can see, Bob Marley and Einstein. Normally, we don't notice the steps behind our evaluations, and other times we may judge the image on aesthetic qualities alone. However, aesthetic acceptance is very subjective and varies from individual to individual based on their whim or fancy, and is not an effective way to decipher visual rhetoric. Aesthetic critiquing becomes more difficult as the images hold more meaning. In other words, the use of aesthetic perspectives to evaluate images is inadequate for application in a rhetorical realm because its aim is to identify artistic merit or aesthetic excellence. It is not concerned with the influence of images on audiences and the way images are constructed to affect such an influence. Now, this fact was noticed in particular by Dr. Sonja K. Foss. It was her goal to apply a rhetorical perspective to the issue of visual rhetoric evaluation in order to offer an alternative schema to aesthetics. Her solution was a three-step process to determine the worth of an image. The first step is to identify the function that the image is trying to convey. The second step consists of assessing how well that function is communicated. And the third step, and final step, is to address the legitimacy of the image itself. The image you see is an advertisement by Mudra Communications in India. Now, when applying the first step of Foss's schema, finding the function, it is pretty clear, thanks to the anchoring of the words to the left, that they are advocating responsible drinking and not driving after drinking. The random and mixed up ordering of the gears implemented in the image also supports the function of not driving intoxicated because it will impair your driving abilities. The second step to this schema is to assess how well the function is communicated. I think because the lack of color in the image and the unfocused, blurred background, the advertisement presents a dark and somber message to its viewers, which is emphasized. The emphasized lighting and the position of the gear stick in the center of the image draws the observer's attention to the out-of-order gears, functioning as a signifier to the difficulties alcohol presents to the driver of a motor vehicle. And the last step to the schema is to address the image's legitimacy. I believe this image is conveying a very legitimate function that drinking and driving is irresponsible and difficult. Everyone knows that alcohol does impair people's reaction time, decision making, and impairs our senses, which is demonstrated by the image. Now, similarly to aesthetics, Foss's schema is open to a bit of interpretation. Different interpretations can be equally relevant as long as evidence is given for that particular interpretation. I feel like my interpretation is pretty obvious for this ad. However, if you remove the words, "when you drink, don't drive," from the image, one could possibly interpret the function as a car advertisement trying to increase sales. In that case, I would argue that the ad fails to communicate the function well, because although the dark colors could be interpreted as sleek and fancy, the jumbled gears would definitely cause some consternation among potential customers.